but let's launch right in. Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Kimball, and I'm one of the co-directors at Montana Environmental Information Center. And I'm just grateful to you all for being here for our webinar on the Regional Haze program. So thanks for being here. I'll open with just a land acknowledgement to say I'm Zooming today from Helena, which lies within the past and present homelands of the indigenous communities that form the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes. So we're committed at MEIC to learning more and to forming reciprocal partnerships with our indigenous community members in advocacy for this beautiful place that we call home. So I'm going to provide a roadmap in just a moment for what we'll cover on the call today, but I'll start first by introducing you to our three speakers, who in an unintentional nod to International Women's Day happen to all be three fantastic women. So we're going to be hearing from Natalie Levine tonight. She is the Climate and Conservation Program Manager at National Parks Conservation Association. She's joining us from the Bay Area of California. And Natalie works to advance NPCA's clean air goals through advocacy on the Regional Haze program, as well as developing and implementing NPCA's 5-year climate plan. And she started at NPCA in the Government Affairs Department, where she educated Congress on park protection legislation and protected national parks from oil and gas development. Natalie also manages NPCA's sister 501c4 organization, the National Parks Action Fund. She has a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley and a master's of public administration from the George Washington University. So thanks for joining us, Natalie. After Natalie, we're going to hear from Ann Hedges. Ann is the other co-director here at MEIC. And she has been fighting for a cleaner, more healthful Montana since 1993. Her extensive advocacy experience covers a wide range of pollution issues, but lately her focus is on climate change, fossil fuels, clean air, and energy. And she's one of the most knowledgeable people in Montana on those topics. So super fun working with Ann. She received her bachelor degree in environmental policy analysis and planning from UC Davis and a master's of environmental law from the Vermont Law School. And then we're going to round out our evening hearing from Carrie Kale of the Park County Environmental Council. She first came out west in 1998 to work in Yellowstone National Park, and she's called Livingston her full-time home since 2009. She recently honed her community organizing skills working to protect Yellowstone from 2 gold mines with the passage of the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act. And now Carrie is PCEC's Business and Community Partnerships Director. So welcome to Carrie. Katie, I'll ask for the next slide, please. Fantastic. So here is what we're going to cover today. I am providing the welcome and introduction. First, we're going to hear from Natalie with a big picture description of the Regional Haze program. Then we're going to ask Ann to speak to us about the nitty-gritty of Regional Haze, what it means in Montana, and how people can most meaningfully speak up on it here. And then Carrie is going to speak with us about how the Regional Haze role can impact clean air for communities near parks and wilderness areas. And then finally, at the end, we'll have a little time for a Q&A session. And as I noted a moment ago, since we're keeping people mostly on mute, if people can drop their questions into the chat function, it's kind of that bottom center chat button on their Zoom panel. That would be fantastic. So with no further ado, I'll ask Katie again for the next slide, and I'm going to ask Natalie to take the microphone and take us where we're going.
Thanks so much, Carrie. It's really nice to be here to virtually see you all. I'm Natalie Levine from the National Parks Conservation Association. NPCA is the oldest and largest non-governmental advocacy organization for our national parks. We've been around for over 100 years, and we have staff working all over the country with national parks and their local communities. And we have many staff in Montana. As Carrie mentioned, I am zooming in from California, but again, we have staff all over Montana, and I've been working closely in the state. So I'm going to start today's conversation with just the quick 30,000-foot view of what the Regional Haze Program is and talk about it from the national level. It's a federal clean air program that is the basis for what we're going to talk about today. And the program not only helps provide clean air to our national parks and wilderness areas, but can also benefit our health, communities, and the climate as well. So next slide. So for over 40 years ago, Congress amended the Clean Air Act with a mandate to restore natural visibility at the 156 biggest and oldest national parks and wilderness areas, places like Glacier, Yellowstone, Zion, and Yosemite National Parks. These places are required under the law to have the cleanest air of any place in the country and are called Class 1 areas. I think Anne will identify the specific ones in Montana later on. The Clean Air Act mandate is regulated through the Regional Haze Rule and requires that all states work to steadily reduce air pollution to achieve natural visibility at these Class 1 areas. So to do that, every state, every 10 years, must create a plan that includes requirements to reduce pollution to make progress toward clear park skies. So states must submit their next Haze plans. Well, they were supposed to have already in July of last year. So any day now, states are supposed to be submitting their plans to the EPA. So while our skies are much cleaner and clearer than they were a few decades ago, not a single park or wilderness area across the country has achieved the Clean Air Act goal of natural visibility. So we still have a lot of work to do. So what exactly is haze pollution and how do we control it through the Regional Haze Rule? So regional haze, as you can see in all these pictures, comes from a cocktail of air pollution, but it's mainly particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur dioxide. And it combines in the atmosphere to scatter light, which results in our not seeing distant mountains or richness in color or the people right in front of us. Haze also worsens community health by driving up healthcare costs, making it harder for kids to learn and play and for adults to work. And as we all know, air pollution also increases the effects of climate change. So much of the country's air pollution stems from the extraction, development, and burning of fossil fuels, whether that's by cars and trucks, as evidenced in the photo here, oil and gas infrastructure and operations, or coal-fired power plants. Air pollution is also produced by large-scale agriculture, the pulp, paper, and pellet industry, petrochemical and plastics manufacturing, and other industrial sources across the country. But we also know that haze isn't only human-caused, and it's also not all within our control. So as a lot of you in Montana know, wildfires are blazing all the time, mostly now across the West, in your state and my state, and the skies become hazy and the air is really hard to breathe. We've had many days in California where we're advised not even to go outside. So we also have neighboring countries and even countries across the ocean that send their pollution our way, and we cannot force those countries to clean up their pollution. But there are many sources of pollution that the states can regulate to reduce their emissions. And so the regulations come through the regional haze plans to regulate those pollution sources. So the states can regulate new or existing sources of pollution in their plans. So any new sources that come online or existing sources that have been around for decades. So the cool thing about this program is that there is an intersection between not only getting clear air in parks and wilderness areas, but also health in our communities. The same sources of pollution that muddy our skies are the very sources that are making our communities and ecosystems unhealthy. So we can utilize the regional haze rule to clean up pollutants that benefit people and places almost everywhere in the country, but particularly for those in the closest proximity to and most affected by the sources of air pollution. As we know, air pollution doesn't know any boundaries and doesn't know if it's sitting over a park or it's sitting in our community. Oh, yep, a little animation here. So I'll quickly go to the regional Haze process, just the really nitty gritty of where we are and where we're going. So there are three key parts of the process. First, there was informal stakeholder engagement. This was where states can share information if they're willing to the public about any of the data or their planned process. We had a little bit of that with the state of Montana. During this time, they're also asking industry for information on their emissions, technologies, operations, and how they might comply with any pollution requests. Also during this period, states are required by the Clean Air Act to consult with federal land managers like the Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's the first bucket. Then we get to the state rulemaking, which is where we are with Montana right now. The state will develop their plan and put it out for public comment. And as I mentioned before, current plans were due actually originally back in 2018, because we're in the current 2018 to 2028 planning period. But there was a federal rulemaking back in 2016 that bumped the deadline for our current 10-year plan until July of 2021. So there was an original delay put in by the EPA, and now due to COVID and a number of other reasons, many states blew out the July 2021 deadline as well. So at this point, it's get your plan in as quickly as you can to the EPA. So once the state finishes their plan, they submit it to the EPA, and then the EPA has a number of options. They can accept the plan as is, they can reject certain pieces of it, they can reject the whole thing. But when they do that, they also put that out for public comment as well. So if the EPA says, we're going to accept parts of your plan, but reject other parts, the public has an opportunity to comment on that process as well. So hopefully we'll get there soon. There's only been one state, DC, that has had their federal rulemaking process complete for the current planning period. So no states have gone through the federal process yet, except for the District of Columbia. And once the EPA takes its federal action, we can eventually then get into possibly litigation, and then hopefully down the line, clear skies for our parks and our communities. So I know that was pretty fast, but I'll pass it over to Anne to talk about Montana.
Thank you, Natalie. I also want to acknowledge that MEIC has been working with National Parks Conservation Association, Sierra Club, Earth Justice for about a decade on this issue. This is the second go around of trying to get emission reductions from large facilities on a course to try to clean up the skies, as Natalie talked about. And this is a super great opportunity, and I feel like I'm going to be speed dating with all of you right now, because I'm going to be really fast. But if you have questions, please feel free to follow up with me. I'm happy to answer questions or provide you more information that's really specific to each facility that I'm going to talk about. These two slides here, those are ones I took last year on the North Fork of the Flathead, adjacent to Glacier National Park, because the smoke was so horrible. And this is a kind of thing that can ruin a trip to our special places. It just is. It was a lovely trip, but it was really unfortunate that the sky was so awful. Next slide. So this, as you heard Natalie talk about, this rule is written to protect what are known as Class 1 airsheds. Class 1 airsheds being national parks, wilderness areas, large wilderness areas, and let's see, I think, and then Fish and Wildlife Service, some of their properties. And the green here are our Class 1 airsheds. The brown are tribal Class 1 airsheds. Oh no, that's not, that's the next slide, sorry. These are the areas that we are trying to protect. Next slide. Katie, there you go. And DEQ has done an analysis, that's the Department of Environmental Quality, state of Montana, that they looked at all the different sources in the state, and they said, who needs to clean up their air? DEQ's conclusion, after looking at all these various facilities, said nobody needs to improve their pollution controls. And as you can see, these are the biggest facilities in the state. So we have Colstrip, Unit 3 and 4, Yellowstone Energy Limited Partnership, which is a small petroleum burning plant, waste petroleum plant next to the Exxon refinery. Colstrip Energy Limited Partnership, it's a small waste coal burning facility just north of Colstrip. Ash Grove Cement, just outside of Helena. The Trident Cement Kiln in Three Forks that affects the air in the Bozeman Valley. The Exxon Billings Refinery, Cenex Refinery in Laurel, Phillips 76 Refinery, and the Northern Border Pipeline. There are a few other sources that DEQ looked at. The one that DEQ, that we're not going to talk about tonight, but the one that DEQ did not look at, that we are going to be asking them to do, is the Hardin Generating Station. DEQ looked at what these facilities were doing a couple years ago to see if they were impacting Class 1 areas. And Hardin almost went out of existence. It's a small, well, it's a medium-sized coal burning power plant in Hardin, just north of the Crow Agency. And they got bought by cryptocurrency last year. And since that time, they have been operating full bore. And if they're going to be doing that, we think that they should be part of DEQ's analysis. As you'll notice, all of these are some of the biggest polluters in the state. They're some of the biggest greenhouse gas emission sources in the state. We want them to clean up their act. And we're really disappointed at the moment at what DEQ has proposed. Next slide. So this is a really busy map, and I apologize for that. So these brown are tribal Class 1 areas. The EPA doesn't consider tribal Class 1 areas as in need of protection, unfortunately, in this process. The green are federal Class 1 areas, and then you can see that the orange circles. These are primarily the sites that DEQ looked at to determine whether they needed additional pollution controls to limit their emission impacts on these Class 1 airsheds. I just wanted to show you how they're kind of scattered all over the state. For our purposes, we're really talking about Ash Grove, the Trident plant, the refineries in Billings, Colstrip Energy Limited Partnership. And you guys probably can't see can you see my cursor? That's unfortunate. And a place out in Eastern Montana. It's a compressing station. Next slide. So EPA requires states to consider really 4 primary things when they consider whether a facility is going to need to install new pollution controls. 1, the cost of compliance. How much is it going to cost each facility to decrease its nitrogen oxide emissions? How much is it going to cost them to reduce their sulfur dioxide emissions? How much is that technology going to cost, and what are the benefits of it? Then you have the second criteria is the time necessary for compliance. How long will it take to come into compliance? Energy and non-air quality environmental impacts of compliance. So what is it going to, what are the costs really? What are some of the things that, the other balancing things that EPA would have to consider? And then what is the remaining useful life of the source being evaluated for controls? So this one is, it's like if you have a house and you have to pay it off in 5 years versus a 30-year mortgage, well, that increases your cost a whole lot. And so if you say the remaining useful life of a facility is only a few years, it's going to be a lot more expensive for that facility to install those pollution controls. Whereas if the facility has to install those controls and can pay it off over 30 years or 20 years, it's a lot easier to justify the economics of that. But what EPA said is the cost of compliance is the highest priority. That really does assume a lot of the other factors here. Most of these things are going to come into the cost of compliance. And so how much does it really cost these facilities to control their pollution? Next slide. And DEQ, I'm gonna do a little DEQ bashing, and I apologize, but they reached a conclusion in which they said they weren't going to do anything. This is my theory, and they came up with a justification for why they weren't going to require anything of any facility in the state. And that is simply unacceptable. It is an opportunity to decrease really harmful air pollutants. They're not just pollutants, as Natalie said, that impair visibility. They're pollutants that harm public health. SO2, NOx emissions, particulates, we know all of these things are harmful for the public, and adding more of them, especially during times when we have fire season or we have other inversions in the winter, that's harmful to public health. There are ways that this rule could benefit public health and visibility, but instead DEQ has taken an approach of doing nothing. I will say one thing that DEQ has done that we really appreciated it is they did extend the comment period for us, because these are really technical documents that they have provided on their website, and we needed more time to analyze them. And we haven't completely finished our analysis, but here's what we know. Katie? DEQ failed to define what constitutes cost-effective pollution control. So most states have defined cost-effective pollution controls as $10,000 per ton of emission avoided. So per ton of SO2 avoided, $10,000 per ton, that's an acceptable cost threshold. Other states have said it's $5,000 per ton. There's a lot of states who come in various places, but ultimately, states are supposed to establish what is cost-effective in order to determine what should be required of these various really big polluters in the state. DEQ did not do that. They provided no information on what their threshold is, what would be considered cost-effective. That's a really important flaw. Next. DEQ did not evaluate high removal efficiencies for pollution control. So DEQ, when it analyzed the cost of installing pollution control, it didn't analyze what the technology could actually accomplish. So let's say a pollution control could eliminate 200 tons per year of SO2. DEQ may have only studied what would it cost because if it only removes 150 tons per year. Well, that's a really different outcome for cost effectiveness. And DEQ just didn't do it. They ignored some of the highest efficiency removal potential of various pollution controls. Next. DEQ inflated the cost of operating the pollution controls. So they said it was going to cost more to operate some of these pollution controls than it costs in reality. They had, for example, some of these pollution controls need reactive agents, things like urea or something that will react with the pollutant in the stream. And they had inflated costs for what that reagent would cost. And it doesn't cost that much. So, you know, they're rigging the system here. Next. DEQ excluded consideration of less expensive pollution controls and said other controls were not feasible, even though they are used at other facilities. So they said, we're going to study this universe of pollution controls, even though there were cheaper pollution controls they could have considered, and they would have been cost effective, and they just didn't do it. And then they said that some technologies were not feasible, for example, on cement kilns, but yet there are cement kilns in this nation who have those pollution controls and are operating today. So there's no reason to say it's not feasible because it absolutely is. Next. DEQ inflated the interest rate for pollution controls. You know, as you know, if you have a really high interest rate on your home, it's going to cost you more money. DEQ used an interest rate that the federal land managers who have already reviewed DEQ's work said was inappropriate. In addition, DEQ said that the tax rate for pollution control equipment needed to be considered in the cost of these pollution controls, and yet Montana eliminated the taxes on pollution control equipment. So there is no tax, but DEQ ran the analysis as if there were. Next. DEQ assumed some plants would close without any enforceable commitment to do so. Now, this is really important because it assumes some facilities would close within the next 10 years, but there is no legal obligation for those facilities to close. And what DEQ said is it would be too expensive to make them install these pollution controls because they're only going to be operating for another 5 or 8 years. In fact, there's no certainty that they're only going to operate for another 5 or 8 years. And EPA requires that they consider the remaining useful life of a facility. And if there's no enforceable obligation to close that facility, they can't just arbitrarily say they're going to be closed soon, so we don't need to bother. Next. DEQ used the wrong inflation factors that increase the cost of the controls. Next. And DEQ assumed pollution control would have to be paid for in a shorter time frame than reality. So a lot of times you have the opportunity to pay off equipment over a 20 or 30-year period of the life of the facility. DEQ assumed that for some of these facilities that they'd have to be paid off in 10 or 15 years, which is unreasonable. First off, there's nothing that says they would have to be. All it does is drive up the cost per ton of pollution. Next. And DEQ did not consider all of the emission units at the refineries. So when DEQ analyzed refineries, it only looked at a few of those emission units, as opposed to looking at all of the emission units that could have an impact on visibility and emissions. And by excluding some of those, they're excluding opportunities to limit the pollution that are coming from those facilities. So DEQ, it cooked the books. Just in so many ways in its analysis of Colstrip and Colstrip Energy Limited Partnership and Yelp and all the refineries. And they said, it's too expensive. We don't know what is too expensive, but we know it's too expensive. That was DEQ's conclusion. We don't even know what is too expensive. And let me say that a lot of what DEQ said was too expensive is acceptable in other states with their thresholds, including Texas, Colorado. These other states who have already done some of this analysis have determined that there is a threshold for, a cost effectiveness threshold, and that some of what DEQ rejected as being too expensive would be acceptable under those other thresholds in those other states. So there's just no other way to say it other than DEQ cooked the books to avoid requiring good pollution controls on all of these facilities around the state. It's really disappointing, and it also, well, it has climate implications, but we won't go into that, but it mainly has public health implications. Natalie, NPCA did an analysis of what is possible and found that DEQ is leaving 30,000 tons of pollutants on the table for us to breathe and to impact our air for at least, well, until the next planning cycle, which is in 2028, but I'm guessing that's going to be pushed back as well. So probably at least another decade, we're going to get more pollution than we need. So what we need for you to do is to comment. So there's a public hearing a week from Friday that DEQ is holding, and just putting in your 2 cents about DEQ should take this opportunity to reduce haze, to protect public health, and to follow the rules as they have been written about how this analysis should occur in order to protect Montanans and people who want to come and see our treasures. So please attend that public hearing. If you need more details, it's on our website. Or you can submit written comments, and you can do that through our website, or you can do it individually. So down here at the bottom, you can see MEIC's website and go to the bill tracker, and you can just submit a comment. Or you can just send your comments directly to Rhonda Payne at DEQ. I highly encourage all of you to participate. I'm not sure DEQ will pay any attention to us. However, it is important because EPA gets the next bite at this apple. EPA gets to review the state's plan. And if nobody cares at the state level, then EPA is going to be less inclined to force the state to go back and do this properly. So I'm going to now hand it off to Carrie.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Natalie, for all of this wonderful information. Just to let folks know, Park County Environmental Council works with our community to safeguard the land, water, and wildlife and people of Yellowstone's Northern Gateway through grassroots organizing and community advocacy. There is an assumption made by many that national parks and wilderness areas are free of pollution with clean air and clear skies. Being a place-based organization, PCEC feels it's important to educate our members and visitors to our community that that's not always the case. We are very grateful for partners like MEIC and NPCA for their expertise on these issues, giving us the information needed to inform our outreach and giving our members the opportunity to raise their voices to protect the things that they really love. I'd encourage all of you to follow the links that were put in the chat today and up on the screen, and reach out to DEQ and make those comments so that they can hear from all of us. Yellowstone National Park and the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness are truly the lifeblood of our community in Park County, our economy, and our way of life. So really, I would just like to thank MEIC and NPCA for this really amazing presentation today and allowing PCEC to help sponsor this. But please, I would encourage all of you to reach out to DEQ and make those comments and stay on top of this so that we can follow this along as it gets to the EPA and comment there if we have that opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
So much information, and I think just really grateful for Natalie and Anne and Carrie and breaking down some of this stuff that's super wonky, but helping us understand why it matters and how people can get involved. Has big implications. I want to be respectful of people's time. It is 5:33. I'm gonna drop back into the chat. What Katie shared earlier, in case people didn't see it. Here are the links to where you can go to our website and weigh in on DEQ's plan. As far as questions goes, we had one question that came through on Facebook that was kind of related to some pollution or concerns in the Missoula area related to the Roseburg Hexion facilities and how kind of odors associated with that, if there's any relationship between that and regional haze, or if that is kind of a different matter entirely.
Well, that facility is one that DEQ reviewed. I'd be happy to share the analysis with whoever had that. If you want to contact me at ahedges@meic.org, and I can send you what DEQ did, but more importantly, in this instance, what the federal land manager said about DEQ's analysis, because that facility is also one that is subject to regional haze.
All right. Got some kudos coming in. Thanks for being here, Rob and Lori. Any other questions? Wonderful. Well, I hope people reach out if they are trying to develop comments and want some guidance or have questions. But above all, just really grateful for everyone's attention and energy and for speaking up and helping us protect this beautiful place that we love and the health of our communities. So thank you, everyone.
Just one last parting note. This is a once in a decade opportunity. Usually for all of these various facilities, when we talk about their air pollution controls, we have to do that on an individual facility basis when they go through a permitting process. And this is one where we get to look at all of our biggest facilities, almost all of our biggest facilities in the state, and have input saying they should be decreasing their pollution. So I urge you to take advantage of this opportunity. It only comes around once every decade, and it's a really big deal for us. So thank you very much for being here, and let us know if you have any questions so we can help you submit comments or testify. Cool. Thank you all. Have a great
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Anne, Carrie.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rob.
Have a good night.